Hi, everyone. When is it time to move on? You've been there. The relationship seems to be going nowhere or worse in the wrong direction. And yet, every relationship has its ups and downs, and you know that. Yet you just don't know. Is this the time to hang in there, or is it time to call it quits? Or what about work? Every day, it just seems to be getting harder and harder to go to work, less and less fulfilling. I mean, you used to love work, but now it's just such a struggle. Is it time to polish up that resume and join the great resignation? Well, my name is Ron Brooks, and I'm your guide to this summer as we explore some of life's greatest questions. And today, we're going to spend some time, a few minutes, on one of those huge relationship questions. Today, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about when is it time to move on? To move on from that job or that relationship that you're in. When is it time? You know, relationships are the key to the good life. And so it's important for us to try to develop. It should be like number one on every one of our lists, to develop happy, healthy relationships. Should be on all our to-do lists. But relationships are not always good. Can I hear an amen to that? In fact, relationships are the hardest thing that any of us will ever do. And so maintaining strong relationships, it requires constant care and communication. If you've ever been tempted to call a relationship quits, then maybe it'll give you some comfort to know that even Jesus got frustrated with his relationships at times. In the 17th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, we see Jesus coming down from the mountaintop where he had been with Peter, James, and John, kind of the three top disciples. And while they were there on the mountain, this cloud enveloped them, and God speaks to them about Jesus and says, "Behold, my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." But when they come off the mountain, Jesus is immediately confronted with a problem. How often does that happen? You go from the mountaintop to the valley in a moment. The other disciples had tried to heal a man, but they failed. So Jesus heals him, but then he says this: "O unbelieving and perverse generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I have to put up with you?" Well, sounds to me like Jesus is ready to go back up the mountain and get away from the people. Been there, done that. I can kind of relate to those feelings, as I'm sure you can as well. Now, Jesus doesn't give up on the people. In fact, this moment begins his march to the cross, where he makes the ultimate sacrifice of his life for each of us. Jesus doesn't give up on any of us. But the fact that Jesus asked the question, when is it time to move on, is an indicator to us that there are limits to our loyalty and our patience in our relationships. The famous parable, the prodigal son, the father doesn't give up on the son who takes his inheritance and runs, but neither does he go after the son. See, love has conditions. Love is not without boundaries. Endless patience is not necessarily grace. Sometimes it's just dysfunction. On the other hand, when we fail to persevere, we retard our own character growth, potentially miss out on a far more rewarding relationship on the other side of those struggles. I've seen way too many relationships end and marriages dissolve when perseverance and grace could have transformed the relationship forever. And I know that that's true because I've also seen people who go the extra mile in relationships and seen them transformed into healthy, life-giving relationships. There is a season to be patient with people and a season to give up on dead-end relationships. Jesus, in another place, tells his disciples to knock the dust off their feet and move on. God doesn't give up on us, but you are not God. The power of free will means that we are at times unable to influence others for good. We need wisdom to know how long we should endure in that relationship or stick with that job. Now, bottom line, only you can answer that question about when it's time to move on. But I do want to share with you some things that could be indicators that it's time to move on. So here's number one. When he or she is causing you emotional or physical or verbal hurt, if you are feeling abused in a relationship, then you need to confront it. And if it doesn't end, then you should be moving on. You should be moving on and moving out for your own well-being. Number two, when the relationship is one-sided. Now, I like to tell couples that marriage isn't a 50-50 proposition. It is 100-100. You have to be willing to work at your relationship with everything you've got. You have to be willing to give 100%. And there will be times, there will be seasons when one of you is doing most of the giving and most of the sacrificing, but that's only for a season. Over time, that should even itself out. It shouldn't be the norm. Likewise, in your workplace, if the expectation is that you are doing all the giving and the sacrificing, but the reward seems disproportional to what you are making, the sacrifices that you are making, then your employer is not doing their part. And it may be time to move on. Number three, when you stay expecting that he or she or the work that you do will somehow change and get better. Expecting your partner to change is never a good strategy. The reality is that you can't change anyone other than yourself. And that's a big enough job for any of us. Thinking someone will change over time rarely works out, and asking them to change to fit your expectations is not a solid foundation for any relationship. If they do change, soon you're going to have something else that you want him or her to change. So until and unless you can accept your partner for who they are now, you will most likely never be happy in that relationship. So it may be time to move on. So here's number four. When you find yourself constantly justifying the other person's reactions. So if you feel like you have to justify an action, it means that you're uncomfortable with their behavior, and so you want to explain it away. Now, there's actually a fancy phrase that psychologists have developed to explain this phenomenon. It's called cognitive dissonance. And we all do this to justify our own behavior, our own actions at times. But if it becomes a pattern in your relationship, it could be an indicator that it's time to move on. Number five, when the same situation or problem recurs, even though you've addressed it numerous times. You've probably heard the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result. Well, the same issues keep popping up in your relationship or at the job. It's an indicator that something is not right. If you feel like the proverbial hamster running on that wheel and going nowhere fast, then it may be time to move on. Number six, when your fundamental values and or beliefs are different. Now, any relationship, any friendship is based on a certain amount of sharing of fundamental values and beliefs. You know, it's true that opposites do attract. But whereas opposites attract, it's the things that we hold in common that keep us together. They serve as kind of the big rocks that hold a relationship in place. When those storms come in the relationship, as they always do, things can get moved around, but the rocks are the foundation that always lets you weather the storm. If your work is requiring you to do things that do not fit with your core values, then it doesn't matter how much they're paying you or how great the benefits are that it offers. No one can survive for long acting in a way that is counter to their core beliefs. Shakespeare has one of his characters in Hamlet say, "To thine own self be true." Solid advice for any of us thinking about whether or not it's time to move on. Number 7, when you feel like you have gone as far as you can go in the relationship or in the job. So, like so many of the things that we've been discussing today, this one is deeply personal, deeply individual, but there sometimes comes a time when you realize that this relationship has gone about as far as it possibly can. It just isn't going to get better. He or she is never going to ask you to marry them. He or she is never going to be the person you need them to be. On and on we could go, but the bottom line is the relationship has hit a dead end, and that's an indicator that it may be time to move on. Relationships are like plants. They are either growing or they're dying. Now, there can come a time when you realize that your boss is never going to recognize your potential, never going to give you that promotion, offer you that chance to prove yourself, give you that raise. Any and all of those things can mean it's time to move on. Well, hopefully these thoughts help you to think about those questions, the great question about when is it time to move on. So if you found this helpful, then pass it on to somebody else. And be sure to like us on our YouTube channel and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss a single edition of life's greatest questions. Because when you ask better questions, you end up living a better life. See you next time.